Okay, welcome everyone. Today to Renaissance imperial life, that of Emperor Rudolf II, Habsburg Emperor who lived between 1552 and 1612. And in the biography that we're going to discuss tonight with the author Thomas DaCosta Kaufmann, it is asserted that the image of Rudolf II as a mad king is mostly the outcome of contemporary slander and how it impacted historiography. So the book described, on the contrary, Rudolf as a moderate politician, as a discerning art collector, as an insightful patron of the arts, of the science, and of letters. And so, as the book, I think you mentioned towards the end that you wish there's some kind of morality that could be taken from this book. It seems that the demise of Rudolf II is an example of the perennial difficulty encountered by moderate rulers amidst the extremist faction. Now, to discuss and explore this matter further, I am joined by the author, Professor Thomas DaCosta Kaufmann, who is Frederick Markham Professor of Art and Archaeology at Princeton University. He teaches and publishes on European art and architecture 1500-1800, and in its global context. He also works on the theory and practice of world art history and the geography and historiography of art. And I should say welcome back, since quite a few years ago he did his master degree at the Warburg Institute. Joining us is Susanna Ivanic, who is senior lecturer in early modern European history at the University of Kent. Susanna's research focuses on Central and Eastern Europe. Her broad research interest spans religion, material and visual culture, and travel. She has extensively published on amulets, religious objects, and in the religious and domestic sphere. And one should mention her monograph, Cosmos and Materiality in Early Modern Prague, which is published by Oxford University Press and received the Society for Renaissance Study Biennial Book Prize in 2022. She was also the principal investigator on an IHRC-funded research network, The Connected World of Central Europe 1500-1700, and even if the funding is over, the work continues, and it's now time to pass the microphone to Susanna.
Thank you very much, Francois, for this opportunity to discuss this book, and thank you to Thomas for writing such a wonderful book that has been a real joy to read. So I will start really with framing and questions around this. The title of the book is The Life and Legend of the Mad Emperor, and the first chapter is Countering the Black Legend of the Mad Emperor. And this provides obviously a clear position on this long-held idea of Rudolf II's madness. But really, one of the key points you make is that Rudolf is concerned with creating an image of magnificence and majesty for himself. And my question is, can you tell us a little bit more how he does this specifically through his collections and his patronage?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, the idea of representation itself may not be thoroughly understood. Obviously, the idea of to represent something is like to show it again, and it's in a work of art. For instance, the image on the left that you see is the representation. It represents the ruler. One way of doing this, of course, is ideally, or you can improve upon his characteristics. In this instance, the picture on the left could also be used as suggested, the way that the images of the monarch in the UK or of the president in the US appear in various public buildings and offices when the ruler or the president or what have you is not present. And it also can serve, and this is another important consideration, something that you might send or people might buy, particularly sending them around in the early modern period, the so-called Renaissance, where they might serve to show the ruler when he's not there. fourth meaning, which is the one that people use in the Renaissance, and it's surprising that this is still not terribly well understood, is to represent what the ruler symbolizes, incorporates, or what have you. And if we concentrate on the picture on the left, the image of Van Aken, there are various ways which we might not be familiar with in which these things are accomplished, although somewhat subtly. For instance, this shows Rudolf as someone who's around 50 years old, and it's, probably a little bit idealized because he's not someone who is physically well a lot of the time, but it presents him in a manner which is picked up as an ideal, the Spanish mode, which he would have picked up from his uncle, Philip II of Spain. That is to say, the black attire, which becomes standard court dress in many places. However, it's embellished by the beautiful lace collar, probably from what's now Belgium. And if we notice as well the hat that he's wearing, and so we go up to the hat, has feathers, which are ostrich feathers, which are very rare and would also indicate, the ruler's ability to acquire these. It also has all these gems, which are probably kind of bohemian garnets in this kind of diamond cut with gold mounts around them. And likewise, the buttons on his garment have them. He's also wearing over his shoulders, which isn't so visible, a fur, which is again a sign of wealth. And then finally, as a symbol of his power, very subtle but direct, he's wearing a chain on which the emblem of the Golden Fleece is located, which is, of course, the Habsburg court order, like the Order of the Garter in the UK, but it's one which was very few people could have been members of, and it suggests the Burgundian and Habsburg traditions and inheritance. And that, I think, is communicated through this picture. On the right, which is one of the things that led people to think, oh, he must be crazy, is an idealized image of the ruler by Giuseppe Arcimboldo, which shows him as the god Vertumnus. Vertumnus, who is capable of taking any form of the seasons, but in this instance, all of the seasons are shown in one. That is to say, you have fruits and flowers of various seasons put together in one image. And he's wearing, as you can see, a kind of baldric, which is a sign of honor, and the sash made of flowers. And on his head, there is a wreath, which the way that the sprouts of corn or grain coming out of it suggest a kind of nimbus, suggest a divine presence. And we know that this is Rudolf, both from a poem that accompanied it and also from the basic correspondences of the facial features. Now, how does this work? It's, of course, a transformation of nature into art, and the transformative functions that the ruler has, who can rule over the seasons and the elements as well, it's suggested. And it is, of course, in having all of the seasons in one, it's suggesting one perpetual season, which is the Golden Age, which will return with the rule of Rudolf II. And there's also a suggestion that this is related to, in terms of where the individual images, the individual fruits and flowers, such as the blackberry in one eye and the cherry and the peach and also the gourd, these are all mentioned in a poem by Propertius, which is one of the poems, the elegies, which are regarded as the imperial elegies, and it's suggested because there was a statue of Vertumnus, which was in the Forum, which suggested that the rule of the Romans, hence the Holy Roman Emperor, would be forever. So that there's a lot going on in this image, and Rudolf clearly liked it, and there's poems which were sent along with these pictures by Arcimboldo, which explicate them. And in a way, of course, this picture also culminates some of the images that people might know of the seasons and elements that Arcimboldo had earlier made for the emperor, for Rudolph's father, Maximilian II. And this is in putting them all together in one image. And I think that gives some sense of this idea of magnificence or grandeur, which also was to be communicated through the collections and through the patronage of the ruler. Yeah, this, so going on to the next ones, let's look at the image on the left, which, if we can, which suggests some of the politics and the actual difficulties that Rudolf had at this time. As Holy Roman Emperor, he felt very much the duty to protect the empire and also more directly the Habsburg possessions. And here it's shown that peace is trying to ward off Mars, which is representing war, and behind it is the Turk, who's shown. And this is an image where that by keeping away war, and the image of the eagle flying to the heavens, where he's going to be, the eventual victory promised to the Habsburgs, there's to Rudolf, there is a sense about how the benefits of peace are also to be achieved. And that is suggested down below by the ideas of justice and peace have embraced. And the result is abundance, which is the figure on the left. And all of this is going to occur under the peaceful effort to acquire to achieve abundance within the empire. And you can see down below that there's a very peculiar version of what we know more now as red, white, red. This is shown as white, red, white, with the down below and the shield, if you can get on the shield, with the crown above it, which is the Habsburg's archducal hat. So this is under the House of Austria. This is going to be achieved, this kind of peace. Now, the difficulty, of course, is that Rudolf faced within the time period is, on the one hand, as suggested by the image on the right, he's fighting a war which was brought on him by the Turks, who had incursions and had already conquered a lot of southeastern Europe, and we're past Buda and Pest, so that there's a very thin strip of Slovakia, Croatia, and what's now present Hungary, which was still under the Habsburgs' control, and part of Transylvania was contested between the Ottomans and the Habsburgs. And so that is the external force, which he's having, external problems which he's having to deal with. Plus, of course, this is a period in which there is an effort within the empire that Rudolf has to maintain peace, to maintain the peace between the antagonistic factions of the Protestants and the Catholics in Central Europe, where it's, there's a division between the two of them. There's the temporary peace had been established by the Treaty of Augsburg, which recognized the notion that he who ruled a region could determine its religion. But that did not take into account the Calvinists, who are the so-called Second Reformation, as it were, nor the other groups, such as Mennonites, who are related to Anabaptist, or the older groups in Bohemia itself, who come out of the Hussites and the Bohemian and Moravian Brethren. So there's an effort to balance all of these things and to keep things from exploding, which of course they do in the catastrophe of the 30 Years' War, which is which begins, people think, in 1618. Rudolf, however, dies before that, and the long period of his reign, which is from 1576 to 1612, and that of his father from 1564 to 1576, is actually, and even Ferdinand from 1558 on, one of the longest periods, if I'm not mistaken, of peace in Europe, in Central Europe, which was disrupted by the 30 Years' War and its catastrophe. And you cannot say that because something occurs afterwards, the 30 Years' War, it's Rudolph's fault. Rudolph kept a lid on it, and one of the things by, I think, focusing on the Turks was try to have a notion of a common enemy which one could fight with. So that's part of what's going on here, I think.
So these are really fascinating discussions and images to think about that problem and question about his personality and character, which there is evidently a lot of sources in the visual world that makes us realize the engagement with iconography and representation and allegory for displaying a certain message. Yet on the other hand, this notion of mental illness in various forms persists. And I suppose the question is, compared to some of the analysis that we can see through these artworks, why has that narrative had such enduring success in history?
Well, first of all, the people who spread these rumors, who are on the one hand his brothers and cousin, were successful in diminishing his authority and power and limiting his rule. And so therefore, at the end of his realm, he was more or less sitting isolated in the imperial castle in Prague, to which he'd moved his residence from Vienna finally in 1583. So from 1583 to 1612, he's largely there. And it turns out that many of these rumors were spread by him, and also particularly by the Spanish and papal ambassadors who did not get their way. And what the efforts were, first of all, by the Spanish and papal ambassadors, to have Rudolf marry a good Catholic, and particularly a Spanish one. And secondly, the brothers who were not taken into account had not received what they thought was their due in terms of power and authority, and were ambitious. And also they wanted to have this succession to the realm clear by having someone, either having one of them appointed or having Rudolf marry someone and have that successor, a legitimate successor, although he did have children who were not, as we would say, legally acceptable, although some of them were acknowledged, take over. And I think that a lot of this is because Rudolf was temporizing. If he'd married one person or another, or if he'd married, as he continues to, the picture on the left is part of it, as part of the marriage initiatives with the various Italian courts. If he picked one of the Italian courts rather than another, then that would have upset the balance of power and balance of authority within Italy. And similarly, where the Habsburgs were nominally in northern Italy and even in Tuscany were nominally rulers under the Holy Roman Empire. And if you pick a Spaniard, that would have upset the other side. There was even talk for a while of Elizabeth of England, or Marie de Medicis, who then had married Henry IV of France, becoming his spouse. I think that for an English situation, one can compare this situation. Elizabeth of England, who does not marry, is regarded as the great Virgin Queen, and how she's a wonderful patron and also defender of England. And on the other hand, Rudolf, who has a similar policy of not marrying for similar reasons, one thinks, is excoriated. And that is taken to account. And then in the 19th century, this whole Black legend was this whole Black legend was made really a fixture of historiography until recently. And even recently, I can't talk. Recently, these this legend has persisted even in the more recent historiography, and that's one of the things that I was trying to counter. Part of this also involves the whole notion of the arts, and maybe you want to go on to that. That is, that the idea that that a ruler is not appropriately involved in the in the visual arts and in patronage and activities in them, which is of course completely false in terms of everything we know about patronage and involvement in the arts of contemporary rulers and in collections, not only in terms of the contemporaries in Central Europe, but we can think of Francesco Medici, who's also regarded sometimes as odd or weird or mad, which is not true, even Cosimo de Medici, but Philip II of Spain, who also corrected architectural designs. Charles V, there's stories of his picking up the brush for Titian and supervising Titian's and in general, people like Heinrich Julius of Braunschweig-Wolfenbüttel, who was a painter, Simon of Lipia also was a painter, and Sigismund of Poland, the King of Poland, also a painter. And that is, and this object here on the left is a work that was turned and actually made by Rudolf, as it says on the inscription at the bottom, and then it was given appropriately to probably to the King of Denmark. Now, turning, which is on a lathe, is of course a skill which was regarded, along with drawing, as something that was appropriate for rulers, and the lathe that belonged to the Duke of Saxony still survives and is now in Écouen, the Museum of the Renaissance in France. And the materials, of course, here, so it's a skill, and of course turning involves a skill, which also is something that we could regard as having sort of cosmic proportions or suggestions to that. Now, the material used is also significant in these kinds of objects and suggests something of the magnificence of this of the objects. That is to say, it has mahogany and gold and rhinoceros, which come perhaps from various parts of the world, and also suggest the involvement with Africa, and the claims, the notion that that first of all you were able to have these odd or supposedly what we would call exotic materials, and or on the right, that the objects made for you also, it's boar's horn, gold, rhinoceros horn, shark's teeth in the mouth, and mounted in this gold manner, which are suggesting again perhaps the 3 or 4 elements: shark, water, also transformation of well, and there are objects on this
these
so so all of these objects together. Now, the idea of collecting in magnificence, this I think I have to say something about how this fits in. And maybe we can go on to this, or we can stay with these other objects. That is to say, that it was regarded, even there is a treatise written at the time, as a matter of raison d'etat, staatsräson, reason of state, that part of that involves collecting, having a Kunstkammer. And the bigger the better, of course. In the instance of the emperor, you should have the best one, and he does. And he has the best painting collection, and he has the best Kunstkammer. And that's actually something that is an idea of the time, and it was developed obviously more under Louis XIV, to whom we could regard as comparable in having all of this kind of patronage and collecting. And nobody gets on him for this.
But it's interesting then that Rudolf is accused of having this kind of collecting mania. And of course, it's Julius von Schlosser in 1908 who talks of Rudolf's collection as a witch's kitchen and spooky eccentricities of the North, compared to that rational, scientific outlook of the Italian South. I mean, what is it that that makes Rudolf's collection different to those? I think you've established really well that this is something that many princes are doing and engaged with. But why does Rudolf's collection get such slander?
Well, because there was no contemporary inventory that was available for Schlosser. The only documents were posthumous, and they did indicate things, and indeed, about Rudolph's involvement with the arts. For instance, if we go back up to the relief, which is one reason why I had it, and that is that was a invention of the ruler himself, and that he probably had this is based on various drawings by Hans van Aken, which were then combined together and put into a relief by Adrian de Vries. And it was similarly, these drawings were probably used for tapestries. So that's his involvement with the invention. The reason why that until 1976, there was no published contemporary inventory of 16711, which does show that the collection had a sense, and it was orderly, and had various principles of organization, and that the Schlosser did not know this. The collection that he was familiar with was that of Rudolf's uncle, which of course is another predecessor, Ferdinand the second, Archduke Ferdinand, who's called of the Tyrol, which was outside of Ambras, where it's referred to as a museum in contemporary print. And that was a collection that Schlosser had, and this was in Vienna, a lot of it in Vienna, whereas Rudolph's collection was dispersed. Many of the great objects are back in Vienna, but they're throughout the world. Rudolph kept the collection of Archduke Ferdinand largely intact, and then it ultimately is partly in Ambras outside of Innsbruck, and a lot of it is in Vienna. But that was part of the reason why this did not enter into general discussion until basically around the time I started working on this material. And, you know, I was starting off trying to, well, I wrote my dissertation on this, and then Francois asked me to return to it and write not an art historical work, but a biography in which I try to account for all of this coming together. And I think that explains a part of it, along with the persistence of the legend of his madness, which also comes from, you know, the way that the Habsburgs are received within particularly Anglophone history. They're the antagonists of the British traditionally, and therefore not good, and they're despots, and or in Rudolph's instance, insane, and this kind of thing. And that's partly, I think, why this collection and Rudolph it was recognized that it was large and important, and there are lots of great works, but there was supposed to be no sense to it. And that's clearly wrong. Also in the way that it was displayed. There were rooms that were made for the display. And Rudolph added these kinds of things to so also the idea, just to point out one thing, in the print up above, yes, that if we zoom in, the idea that Rudolph was a recluse, this was again, you know, they said, oh, he shut himself up as the palace. Well, not true. I mean, first of all these works are being sold, and then in the back you can see him. There he is. He's and this is an overlooked detail in this famous print of the Prague Castle, and there he is, and there are people seeing him. So obviously this was something that happened regularly, and not only that, while he didn't allow the Catholic, some of the people he didn't like or he wanted to put off, he didn't have them give them audiences, but people whom he wanted to deal with, he gave audiences to at the very times that he's not supposed to be doing this. So
I
that, I
suppose
think, is part of it. Yeah.
I suppose this is part of the question around the representation and
Yeah.
symbolism as to the extent that he keeps this collection in his control as to who he shows it to. And of course, even now with that 1607-11 inventory, it's trying to figure out how things were kept and displayed, and many things are kept in chests or in their own cases. So there is a different sort of interaction with his Kunstkammer and collections to some of the other emerging museums, I suppose, of the time. So perhaps this plays into the narrative somewhat.
Well, the collections were not really accessible to many people until just about this time, and then it's variations in which this occurs. There are no, obviously, public museums per se. They are still, even when you get to see this collection, and people did see it, it was shown regularly to ambassadors, it was shown to foreign dignitaries, as it was a sign of favor, and people who were friendly with the court artist could get in. And that's why we have some descriptions of this, even including people who were just visiting could have managed to get in. This is showing the broad reach of people who were involved there. You can see people in European costume. There's someone who's probably in Polish or Turkish costume, and then there are people who are probably Persians who are there, and you can see them with the turbans, who are visiting, along with people who are probably Hungarian or Polish and so forth, and various, in the foreground, that's probably Hungarians, and with the club or Poles, that's Hungarian hats there, and with the other kinds of costume. So there's a wide variety of people who are in Prague and around, and there was a lot of context of it, and the rumors of this obviously spread. They're spread, first of all, by Karel van Mander, who knew Spranger, the court artist, who visited Haarlem at the date of which the great history of Netherlandish painting was made, and the description of Rudolph's collection is the most important one in Europe. So that was something that was known broadly. And as far as, people's public opinion, this is something that is not necessarily that you worry about. The only people who count are the upper echelon and the rulers, and that has to be taken into account and understood. Why, we don't have a broader access? Well, partly the reason for having not broader access is something that Rudolf would have learned from, that, and it's still the case. Now people, like in the United States, sell the access, but the proximity to the ruler is important, and particularly in a time in which there's not a democratic government, and so that favor is important, access is important, gift giving and granting things are important. And Rudolf learned from Spain that you deliberately, from his experience where he'd lived in Spain, and Philip II does the same thing, you keep isolated, you keep people apart, and you keep the vulgus at length, you avoid them, and you just allow certain steps through which you have to come to visit, and that creates a kind of mystery. And this is an idea, again, the mystery of rule. That is something that Rudolf certainly was aware of, and that is part of what's embodied in the collection, that it becomes mysterious and grand and magnificent. Now, that, of course, was turned on its head, and when people didn't understand what was going on and didn't understand the principles of rule, that was one of the notions, which was not understood. But the idea of pragmatic policy, politeia, was something that is definitely involved in all of this, and involved in the use of the collections as well, even expressly, in terms of the political theory of this time.
And part of that as well, of course, is gift giving, and maybe going back up to the drinking vessel that he
Yes,
made.
yes,
That this was thought to be a gift as well. Is that right?
yes, yes. And also the up above the relief, there are other allegories that were given as gifts to, for instance, the Duke of Saxony, whom he courts, and even says specifically, well, we've always had good relations, and part of it, I know that you're interested in art, so he gives things to people whom he knows are interested in art, and conversely, in order to get his favor and attention, you give works of art or naturalia to him, which is what happens in various ways. In addition to acquisition, all the bits of this are recorded in prints and drawings, and that's given to the Duke of Saxony. Okay.
Yeah. So another element, of course, in the court and in Rudolph's conception of his collections was the bringing together of artists and natural philosophers, um,
Yes,
who often had multiple skills themselves, the same
yes,
people. And in chapter 4, you delve into the so-called sciences, and this takes us to this idea, well established already by yourself, the mastery of nature, that's so
yes.
important to Rudolf. And so, what extent do you think this moment at the end of the 16th century and the early 17th century is one in which artists and natural philosophers, all these kinds, are coming together from different traditions in order
Yes.
to forge a sort of new understanding of nature?
Yes. Well, one of the things, of course, does involve very much of this matter of what we would think of as the development of modern science is observation. And clearly that's what's involved. Rudolf sends out the artist on the left, Roland Savary, to study rare wonders of nature, as they're called, but also to make sketches, which are then used in his pictures. And the one on the left is certainly one of them, of a tree or of a tree trunk, the actual observation of natural phenomena, and then using them in paintings. This is something that is special for this time and done, as it's said, and as Savary writes on his drawings, after life, after nature, as opposed from being from the imagination. And that's probably also true. That is, so there's description, and then if we can turn to the right, which is a very interesting, um, there's also a matter of classification and description. So, and here I think this is very important to recognize all of the languages that the person who made this object, and that's Anselm Boethius de Boot, does, that are so it's Latin, Greek, Spanish, Italian, German, French, English, Flemish, and even Czech, Medved down there in Bohemian. And then this is a kind of preliminary classification, which leads obviously into Linnaeus and thinking about how the classification of species. And it's clear that in the 18th century, the bear is there, which is used, and then someone who has read Buffon and then uses, oh yes, this is a brown bear of the Alps. So is the further development in this kind of classification system. Now, the person down below, who signs it ADB, vacant, Anselm Boethius de Boot, is very interesting and important because this is a person who is actually known as more as a scientist. This is a man who writes the first known scientific treatise on gems, which is descriptive, but also is involved in making up emblems, so involved in allegories and working together with Sadler, who is the person who designs the print we were looking at previously, and is also someone who is through his work, known for what alchemy, which is associated with Prague. But alchemy has also an observational and a descriptive context. It uses, however, a language of symbolism, which is not that which is that of modern chemistry, and does not rely on mathematical symbolism, but on a kind of visual language, of visual symbolism. Nevertheless, it's been worked out that the observational qualities of alchemy, they do produce what is described. It only is that they don't, and I don't know if de Boot actually believed in this. They don't regard the transformation of lead into gold, although you can make materials look like gold or silver. Okay, so that's significant with the ADB here, and the bear, and which is again observed probably from some bear that Rudolf owned.
Mm.
So,
And
yeah,
and in Prague, it's just incredible the extent to which there seems to have been the encounters and exchange between artists, artisans, natural philosophers,
yes,
and that conversation that is happening there, even though
yes,
much of the produce seems to have been kind of taken up into uh, more national types of art history, claiming these artists back for themselves. It's in Prague where they are developing these ideas
yes.
together in conversation.
Yes, and involved with the sciences. And the image on the left here, the sextant, is one that which should seize upon, because this is made by a person, Habermal, who works for the ruler, makes scientific instruments. And this is one that was probably used by one of the two most famous people who actually work in Prague, that is to say, Tycho de Brahe, and by Johannes Kepler, and used to make observations. And it is the observations that form the basis of probably what is the most important thing that comes out of Rudolphine Prague, and that's Kepler's formulation of the first two laws of planetary motion, which are still taught for people who take school physics. And also Kepler basing the the observations which led to his discovery of these things, and then using ultimately the telescope, which, by the way, Rudolf suggested that Kepler look into and use. And Kepler, just talking about astronomy with Rudolf, and this is very significant if we think that Rudolf's crazy, at the end of Rudolf's life in 1610, he remarks that Rudolf had the same kind of spirit of Galileo, and it was an intelligent person, and Rudolf could talk with these people, including the great figure of Johannes Kepler. And the Kepler, recognizing this, makes a posthumous to Rudolf publication of the tables of observations of the planets and the stars, which are called the Rudolphine tables, in homage to Rudolf II, his former patron. So,
And Rudolf is constantly inserting himself into all of these projects,
yes,
um, and this is again seems to be extraordinary amongst the collections,
yes,
and in particular, this idea of the rivalries and collaborations that he seems to manipulate in
yes,
inviting certain people or giving them tasks. So even I think Pfaff, who's a drinking cup with the horns, is
yes,
involved in this. Um,
yes. That's made by two people, one who is carving the rhinoceros horn, and significantly
Mm.
transforming what seems to be, which is an animal, into coral, making it look like coral. And at the same time, the cast figures up above are cast salamanders, crayfish, and down below there are also insects. So, which is the combination of the goldsmith Schweinberger and the craftsman Nicholas Pfaff. So they're working together and involving something that also Yamnitzer had created, this idea of cast from nature. And also that there are flying objects, insects, which are regarded as part of fire, earth, so there's animals and vegetables and fire, air, water, etc., all involved in this various object, which, yes, is part of this whole collaboration and this idea that everything can be combined together, this idea that all of the world can be taken together and controlled. These objects, of course, also the rhinoceros, which is still regarded as having medicinal properties, was something that it was these cups were taken because they were supposed to be antidotes to poison. You could drink out of them and you wouldn't be poisoned and so forth. This idea, or that they have some kind of good effect on you.
And
Yeah.
and what's interesting there, I mean, we mentioned it a little bit before about the exotic materials, um, and the global scope of this
Yes.
collection. But I mean, and of course, your last chapter is about Rudolf and the wider world, and
Yes.
thinking about him in those
Yes.
contexts. And I suppose, I mean, yeah, is there a question here of imperial ambitions there?
Yes. Yes. I think that that's part of it, all of this. And of course, it's expressed here that in Rudolph's, in this image, this great sculpture by de Vries of Rudolf II. Yes, the idea is that, well, it's a standard notion of microcosm and macrocosm, and then the relationship of that in turn to the world of states, that there's this parallel seen throughout these various dimensions and realms. And this is an idea that is common also to, Elizabethan literature. People would know it from English literature, from most clearly expressed in John Davies, but also it's in Milton and everywhere else, and in Shakespeare. The So the idea of the emperor ruling over the world of states and ruling over the collection and having objects from all the world in his collection. Now, this object, which is also important, which is an idealized image of Rudolf, which is inspired by that of Charles V, this actually, one can think about this in terms of the display. You were mentioning this, and where it's placed in the collection. The first object, as you were to enter the Kunstkammer, you would see on a table was that of Charles V, and in the middle of his collection, ruling over the collection, is Rudolf II. And significantly, this is now placed on axis in the Kunsthistorische Museum in Vienna, and the Art History Museum in Vienna, directly on axis, standing in the middle of Rudolf's room, which is the middle of the collection, and the so-called Kunstkammer, and Rudolf stands there. Now, the symbolism of this is profuse, but it's also intelligible. It's victory and peace up top, the imperial, the griffin and lion down below, which are the Habsburg, the arms bearers. And there's the golden fleece again. And this time, if we look up above, this time in the proper chain, which consists of the fire iron and oriflamme, which are the actual chain of the fleece, carrying it, which is a Habsburg symbol, the sash of the ruler, so he's shown as victorious, and then down below, he's standing, there's an eagle, which is carrying it aloft, which is suggesting it's like the idea of Roman apotheosis of the ruler being carried to the heavens. And at the same time, there are the two figures, I think it's the two gods who are embraced and at around, and one of them having his hand over the eagle. So it's also Jupiter, and I think it's Mars or Mercury. I can't remember which, who are seen in the back. So this again, it's a kind of complex and elaborate symbolism, which is again something which could be regarded as arcane, but those who understood and should know, and those people who understand these things. And if you don't, then there's the pamphlet given by Archibald, or presented along with the pictures. to explain further what they are. But this would have been known because of the multiple versions of these things by Pompeo and Leo de Leone of Philip II and of Charles V, etc., and even the Onkelink images of the Duke of Alva, who owned one of these kinds of things of Philip II. And Rudolph's just incorporates or plays off of these images. This is, of course, an idealized suit of armor, as opposed to the one that appears in the Charles V bust, which is actually the armor that he wore at the Mühlberg, at the Battle of Mühlberg, where he defeated Charles V defeated the German Protestants.
The layers of symbolism are sustained through through every piece, and
Yes.
And this all just compounds this idea of the Pansophy, the desire for the universal knowledge, in which
Yes.
everything is related to everything else. And
Yes.
as you talk about this, this proceeds from the idea that knowledge is power.
Yes.
Um, so I mean, yeah, it's really, really strongly evident through this that whilst Rudolf has this mediating role, he has an extraordinary idea about his position as a ruler. But also he is creating this legacy for himself of artistic and scientific patronage. And I mean,
Yes.
you may want to say a little bit more about that, but also my other, final question really is, did he have an idea about what would happen to this legacy once he died?
Well, the first thing that needs to be said is that a lot of these things, and we can go back and look at the occult image, the bell, which is obviously it's an electrum. It's made out of the 7 elements, and it has all kinds of, and the 7 planets. You can see there's Mercury and Venus are identifiable, and it has Greek and Pseudo-Arabic, which is what's here up above, and Pseudo-Syriac, and they're the symbols again up above of the elements, and again they're all combined here, the elements and the planets, and the bell, because of course music and the music of the spheres and music, harmony being brought together. But the idea of all this alchemical and scientific knowledge, the alchemy was, of course, to create, again, some kind of control. To gold, of course, is something that people were worried about, how we would improve the production or the purification of gold and silver, or transform things, but also the magical part of it is to transform things in a way that create, again, the sense of power or control. And that's part of what I think, and the people who are magicians, all of the main figures, 3 or 4 figures, Dee and Bruno and Della Porta, all regard, the transformation is going to occur within one ruler and one flock, and one ruler who will control things. And that's the idea of power. We may regard this as fantastic, but this was not fantastic from their point of view. And until, where these things get sorted out in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, and the demystification, as it were, of the world, this was regarded as really possible. Now, what Rudolf would think would happen after him, well, I don't know. I mean, he didn't have a successor, and he didn't leave a will. So but part of the problem is that the people, then took it and were even thinking of selling it off, and then the Swedes sacked it because of that. But no, I don't think that, not the way that his predecessors, Maximilian and Ferdinand, did say certain things that should be remaining inalienable to the House of Habsburg. And Rudolf for whatever reason, although maybe we don't have it, if he had some kind of will. And so, well, but who would he have left it to? That's the problem. He was thinking perhaps that his cousin, Archduke Leopold, should have succeeded him, but he made a mess of it by, certain intervening on supposedly on Rudolph's behalf, and his troops went wild, and that spelled the end to Rudolph's reign. But I don't think that I don't know. I don't think that Rudolph, or we don't know that if he had a will, we don't know what he thought would happen to this after him.
So perhaps there are still discoveries to make,
Yes,
even after this
absolutely.
masterful biography. So
Well, thank
I
you. Thank you.
will,
There
with
certainly are
that,
discoveries to be made all the time
yeah.
about everything, including, and that's the great part of the humanities. I mean, we find things all the time, even about very famous artists like Michelangelo. There's still Michelangelo's to be discovered, and more material about him, and certainly about Rudolph. So this will go on, and then somebody will revise what I've said too. So that's fine.
Well, thank you. I was just going to finish by saying, yeah, thank you again, Thomas. And I see
Yes,
this book opening up
thank you.
a door to a new generation of scholars on Central and Eastern Europe,
Well, I
who will
certainly
be,
hope that happens. Yeah,
yeah,
thank you.
yeah. So
Thank you.
thank you again, and I'll pass
Thank you.
over to Francois for the wider
Thank you.
questions.
Thank
Yes,
you.
well, thank you both. And now it's time to open the conversation to the audience. So do send me your question through the chat, or you can also use the raise hand option, and then I'll ask you to unmute yourself. Well, since we were talking of discovery, you mentioned that Rudolph was drawing and that some other rulers were painting. I know that drawing is part of aristocratic education. It's in
Mhm.
Aristotle politics. So, in terms of discovery, is there some drawings that we know by Rudolph himself, or perhaps some to discover? That's my first question. And the second question, I'm not surprised that other rulers were drawing, but painting require, all sorts of people crushing pigments. I mean, it requires a workshop around you. So is there evidence of this?
Well, there's some suggestion that Rudolph went to watch his painters, and then he sometimes took up the brush himself. And he
Okay.
certainly would have been, I don't know of any paintings or drawings by him that survive. They've been lost. Maybe they are to be identified. We
Hmm.
do have this cup, and we do have the notion that he made inventions. And that I think is probably correct, that 3 or 4 things that he had an idea, well, you put this together with this, and you put this together and do this that way. I think he's commanding his people, and he went regularly to look what they were doing. It said he was a goldsmith, and probably was. So, and turning is he was skilled at that. I don't know about the paintings. Other people, other rulers did paint, so that is something that he could have done. I mean, we do have paintings. They're not great, but we do have paintings by his very close friend, Heinrich Julius, who was head of the Privy Council and significantly a Protestant, and also by Simon of Lippe, who was a Calvinist, and that's also significant that he worked with Rudolph. And you can't imagine that in Philip II Spain or in many other places. And Simon of Lippe, who was his agent for buying works in the Netherlands, was also a painter. So we do have a painting by him. But
Okay.
Rudolph, I don't know.
Okay. Well, I don't see anything in the chat. Well, let me enjoy your
Yeah.
company and ask you another question. Regarding patronage, you were mentioning the patronage of Louis XIV, and in
Yeah.
terms of patronage and the art, one I'm fairly familiar with is Cosimo de' Medici, who,
Yes.
in 1540s, 1560s, and it's someone whose patronage is really about controlling the arts and controlling the men of letters, the intellectual,
Yes.
and the painters. And Louis XIV has the same attitude, I think, in a kind of
Yes.
on the steroid ways. But when I read you and when I look at Rudolph, behind his patronage, there's the idea of him being represented as the universe. So there's an aspect which is much more perhaps ambitious than mere politics and control, that has almost a kind of a metaphysical way. Would you agree with that characterization?
Yes, I would. I see great parallels, of course, with the Florentines, with whom he's very cognizant of what goes on there. They're Florentines who come to Prague, and he's, of course, related in a way to Francesco, because Francesco marries Joanna, and so that is also true. That yeah, I mean, I don't think that he can quite control things the same way. I've talked about there being an academic ideal in Prague, although there's no academy that's founded per se. And we could get into this, what is meant by the academic ideal. But he does have these artists working for him, and he pays them salary and he gives them gifts. But they do supplement their income and they do work for other people. So there's no exclusivity in terms of what they're able to do. Under Cosimo, there's a kind of shift which kind of occurs later, of course, because the older artists continue to work for Cosimo, where they didn't have this method of control. And there are other modes that occur in terms of having a kind of capo ahead of things. And that's more in Munich, perhaps, where significantly it is Friedrich Sustris who'd been in Florence, who picked it up and who had worked under Vasari and probably has the Vasarian model. And that's what happens there in part, where the court is a center and they try to control things much more, and then rolled out of money by doing this in the 1590s. Whereas Prague, and then try to pick up, so they continue under Maximilian, but Prague, it's another model, and it's perhaps more like Spain, where there are people who work for Philip II, or Philip II brings to them, or they order works from abroad, and then Pompeo Leone does come, but Pellegrino Tebaldi and Zuccari come to Spain, but it's not quite the same as having everything under control. Certainly El Greco, who's most famous artist of the time, did do some things for Philip II, but wasn't a court artist, didn't succeed in doing that. So that's more like El Greco, who probably knew Spranger, who was Rudolf II. So there are all these parallels and connections across Europe, which need to be thought of in thinking about all of this. But it's a good question, and as Susanna's questions are all good ones too, and they can't quite be answered entirely.
Okay, we might.
If anybody in the audience had questions, or if you have others, Francois.
Okay, well, thank you. No, there's someone who says thank you. Very interesting. Sorry that I have to leave. Well, let me ask you perhaps a very naive question. When I look at his patronage of painting, and especially of Spranger, he's someone who obviously like erotic arts and has a taste for eroticism in painting and in mannerism. On the other hand, he never got married and had a successor. How can one explain this kind of dichotomy that is a ruler without successors, not even with a daughter? He was not interested in alliance. You mentioned.
Well, I mean, my explanation of this, and this is what caused part of his downfall, because I keep trying, his mother, particularly, who is, what shall we say, an arch-Catholic, the sister of Philip II, daughter of Charles V, keeps trying to press him into marrying a good Catholic girl, let's put it that way. And he doesn't do it. And I think for the reasons he didn't want to be subject to Philip and subordinate to him. And that's part of the issue, why he doesn't particularly why he doesn't do that, although he was upset when Isabella, who had been betrothed to him from the time that they were little, then she marries his brother Albrecht or Albert, and that's Albrecht and Isabella, or Albert and Isabel, and in Brussels. You know, then patrons of Rubens and so forth. But the that, you know, is out. As far as the erotic imagery, yes, he was like this, but all of them do, including Philip II.
Yeah,
Which we
no,
forget.
absolutely. But he had descendant, Philip II. But
Yeah, yes. Well,
okay.
Philip II, yes, he marries. As Rudolf is anomalous in not being married, and I just see that he was interested in women clearly because he had a lot of mistresses, and he
Yeah,
did have he did have children, and
I see.
partly he, perhaps Philip too, may have had tertiary syphilis, from which a lot of rulers, a lot of people did have, and
Hmm?
that may account for some of his
Um,
weakness. And he had that, and he had heart trouble, I think.
I see.
And
Well,
that accounts for some things that are regarded as
okay.
melancholic or
On,
as
on the subject of the health of Rudolf, now I have a question in the chat
yeah.
from Nelab Sina. Thank you so much for your talk. I have read now and then about Rudolf alcoholism, particularly in one report from Christian of Saxony, who says that he was drunk for several days while visiting Rudolf. Would you say something about other source for his reputation, and if this can explain other aspects of Rudolf's state of mind, or is alcoholism really much more rampant at the courts of Europe at the time? I think it's average of 2 liters of wine a day in this time, but
Yes, well, I mean, I think that it's the other way around, that Christian II was definitely an alcoholic and probably died young because of that. And he's the one who's described as being drunk most of the time when he's at Rudolph's court. That is true. But I don't know of Rudolph as being described as being drunk. However, it is correct about consumption of wine, but you know, people drank either wine or beer.
that's right, yeah.
Water would have made you sick most of the time, and particularly all of the nasty diseases you can get from drinking water which is not pure. So yeah, they drank a fair amount of wine. I don't know of Rudolph being described as being drunk. I think he's being described as being melancholic or angry, or, you know, falling and that kind of thing. And
Certainly,
I don't know of his being being an alcoholic. But as you say, that there is a large scale consumption of wine all over Europe, and that continues, of course, and in various places. That about, I would have thought more beer consumption. The Czechs and the Germans are the biggest, well, consumers of beer, although that's not, no, I don't know. In France, beer is being consumed not so much as wine, but I do note that I have observed, and you people may observe this in France as well, that people are having wine with their breakfast, but certainly beer is drunk with by workers and other things, like with the breakfast in Prague now. So
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know what to say further about that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, well, if I can connect things together,
Yes,
Ficino explains that wine is a good remedy against melancholy. I mean, if it's drunk in
yes.
with some kind of moderation.
Hmm. That's
Well,
true. It would have been prescribed.
yeah,
Yes, well, and
exactly.
regarded as healthy that he have it. I don't know. I've not read anything about. Rudolph may have been regarded as unsteady with his gait and all that, but I think that's more related to the other aspects, that he has heart trouble, that he has perhaps syphilis. I'd not heard. Nobody described it as being drunk while he was unsteady. That was melancholy and his insanity. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think there's no more question in the chat. I think it's really time to thank you very much,
Thank you for having me.
and Susanna for your contribution and
Thank you.
conversation.